Happy New Year and Happy New You, unless you go by the Chinese New Year, in which case you're still a beached whale for another month. It's your favorite embarrassing cringe lord, Nasty Nurgle Nick here, praising the Emperor with another intricate weapon breakdown. Today I'm going to be checking out one of the most fast-paced and exhilarating weapons in the game, the Rockatansky Combat Blade. We'll be looking at what sets it apart from other weapons, different builds that utilize it, and ultimately crowning the undisputed king of the Combat Blade. Unfortunately, the Combat Blade comes in two distinct variants, the Mark III and the Mark VI, and I had to agonize over the decision of which one to focus on. Luckily, they're mostly defined by their heavy attacks. With the original Mark III, its heavy attack has twofold uses. First and foremost, it's an extremely effective single-target attack. It comes in from above, making striking weak spots simple and effective, and it does considerable damage to even the toughest, carapaced armored enemies. And as a secondary benefit, as I'm sure everybody already knows, it also gives us massive mobility.
Run faster with a knife. Everyone runs faster with a knife!
The sprint while inside the considerable charge-up time of the heavy attack lets us zoom around even faster than classes who have spec'd into movement speed. That mobility lets us escape getting cornered, catch up to allies, outrun enemy hordes, and leap into the fray to pick up down teammates or to land a devastating headshot. On the other hand, the Mark VI's heavy attack lets us cleave through the hordes a bit better than spam-clicking our light attacks at the expense of everything that makes the Combat Blade fun, satisfying, and effective. Guess which one I'm focusing on! A comparable weapon to our Swift Strike Assassin Combat Blade would be the Flurry Assassin Aatrox Mark II Tactical Axe. What's the difference between Swift Strike and Flurry, you might ask? Well, Swift Strike is a tag for weapons that unleash rapid attacks with unparalleled speed, while Flurry weapons have improved attack speed during close combat. The significant difference clearly being that weapons with Flurry will lose their attack speed if you try to use them as ranged weapons. The first big thing separating these two is that the axe doesn't have the same insane mobility that our knife has, despite sharing the mobility bonus stat. This is because its heavy attack has you slow down for the windup before lunging on release, whereas our combat knife has us charging forward for the windup and only slowing down when landing the attack. But the tactical axe makes up for it by also being incapable of taking down the strongest enemies in the game and having worse horde clear, which is why you constantly see players hobbling around with their cherished tactical axes instead of racing around with combat blades. Seriously, if someone has a use for the Aatrox Mark II Tactical Axe that isn't as a suppository, let me know in the comments below. But there are also the combat axes, like the Achilles Mark VIII and the Rashad Mark II. They again lack the amazing freedom of movement afforded to us by the Combat Blade, but look at their tags. Armor piercing to counter armor targets and strike down, the largest, hardest hitting attacks designed to take out the toughest targets that might otherwise be untouchable. Absolute monsters of weapons designed specifically to take out massive threats like Crushers, whose only drawback is that they still underperform in DPS when compared to a vegetable cutter, which is why you constantly see players hobbling around with their cherished combat axes instead of racing around with knives. I'm so happy that all these war axes have a bunch of clunky drawbacks and yet still can't match the DPS of a goddamn dagger. Now that we've covered what can only be loosely defined as the competition, I want to break down how we can get a good combat blade, which you can easily extrapolate to any weapon. Whenever you go through the store, as much as it wants you to look at this number up here, this is the one that matters, our modifiers rating. When you're at max level, new items are going to roll between 300 and 380, with the higher modifier rating translating to higher bonus stats. Now, even with a perfect 380, our bonus stats won't all be maxed out at their limits of 80%. There will always be 20% missing amongst the 5 stats, so usually when you're gambling for a good base weapon to upgrade, you identify a dump stat, one in particular that you're fine with lagging behind because it's less important to your build than the rest. So let's go through the bonus stats of our combat blade. There's of course damage, working exactly how you'd imagine. Then there's mobility, which affects our sprint speed, dodge distance, and dodge limit. Then we have penetration to better mitigate armor, finesse to get big multipliers out of criticals and headshots, and buffing our attack speed, and finally first target, which is closer to only target when dealing with the tiny cleave of the Mark III Combat Blade. None of these are easy dump stats, but the obvious choice is mobility, for one reason in particular. Our dodge limit, while listed as 4 to 6, is still locked at 5 even when we have a perfect roll of 80% mobility, because Fat Shark likes to lie and show us the theoretical maximum of 100% that we literally cannot achieve. Thank Thanks, fat shark! So as long as we don't dip down to 4 dodges, which is pretty much impossible, our mobility is more than high enough because, you know, it's still the insanely mobile combat blade. Of course, perks are pretty obvious. Critical damage, carapace damage, weak spot damage, they're all excellent choices where the only one that's significant enough to be considered the best in slot is the extra 5% chance to crit. As for blessings, the combat blade has a lot of quality options so you don't have to be especially picky with what the game gives you, but for my taste, one in particular outshines the rest: Mercy Killer.
It was a mercy killing.
Up to 60% extra weak spot damage to enemies who are bleeding, an enormous bump up in damage if we have a way of consistently applying bleed stacks to our enemies. After seeing that, the natural choice for the combat blade is, of course, the Veteran. With their automatic bleed on hit, insane base toughness, and incredible finesse damage talents, they stand head and shoulders above the rest for pure combat blade DPS potential. The most obvious way to go through the tree would be the default melee Veteran way. Straight down the center through the quality toughness talents, where we have the choice of either the crack grenade or the smoke grenade, where we obviously choose the former because the smoke grenade doesn't even stop snipers from seeing you for some god-awful reason. Like, it's the one thing the smoke grenade could be considered useful for in a game, and do that! Like, what the fuck?
Like, what the fuck is that?
Then we hop over to Nab's serrated blade and grab Grenade Tinkerer to make the most out of our crack. And select the damage aura because, honestly, we're already using the combat blade. We're going fast enough, for fuck's sake. Then straight down through the grenade replenishment to keep our cracks full and into the best ability in the game. We grab the insanely useful overshield and probably ignore only in death does duty end. This is because the lower radius and the bigger hit to our cooldown. It's generally better to have our voice of command going off more often to pump up everyone's toughness and toss enemies away rather than sitting on for an easy revive, especially when the default shout gives us enough space to pick up an ally in just about every situation anyway. Not to mention the massive temporary benefits we get each time we shout, incentivizing us to do it as often as we can. From there we have a lot of key talents we want to hit. The 30% weak spot damage node on the left, then down the center tree through the amazing ability cooldown talent that I've gushed over in my previous video, through 2 amazing toughness nodes that need to bring it down to give us that huge damage bonus when we need it. Then finally through the melee side of the tree where we probably want to get both reciprocity and close quarters kill zone because they're both incredible. Then the crit chance and finesse that complements our combat blade perfectly, brittleness for the armored enemies who will actually survive an attack from our knife, and attack speed. For the last 2 talent points, there are definitely a lot of great nodes around, but for the combat blade, there's no better than the simple 5% increased critical strike chance. And since we're there, I always pick up Leave No One Behind, which is especially fun with the combat blade because the extra 20% movement speed means you can absolutely motorboat your way across the map to whatever ally needs you.
You motorboating son of a bitch, you old sailor, you.
With these talents, we can easily devastate every enemy in the game. We're not gonna mow through hordes, which I define as a character who can melt through trash without so much as dodging, like his Zealot spamming light attack on his heavy eviscerator, the 2-handed chainsword, but our horde clear is still good. Our cleave is pretty much non-existent, but our light attacks come out so quickly and do enough damage that, with some timely dodges for our near limitless supply of mobility, we could handle trash well enough. Our Mauler and Crusher damage isn't the best compared to more specialized weapons, but it's certainly not bad and lends us tons of mobility to slip out of overhead so we can charge in and out with confidence. All in all, it's a solid build for someone who really likes the combat blade. But you know what's better? Sacrifice a few talents and we can easily morph this into a variant of Shrapnel Hiroshima Batman coined by Grand Mentos 3956 himself. Make the extra leap to grab the Shredder Grenade instead. If you're wondering why, feel free to check out my previous video where I go into detail, including a portion where I explain in graphic detail what's gonna happen when they have to saw off Lizzo's diabetic foot and replace it with a peg leg for just 900 kilos. Then it's mostly the same except we make sure to grab Twin Blast and Grenadier along our way. We have to sacrifice precision strikes on the left to have the points to do all that, and when we traverse down through the middle we grab Demolition Team rather than Iron Will. Then we can get the exact same nodes on the right except now we need to choose between Reciprocity and Close Quarters Kill Zone. I usually pick up the latter since, in Orc Damnation, us veterans get to shout a whole lot due to the insane waves of specials resetting our cooldown so that 15% close damage has a near 100% uptime when we want it. With this, we get all the benefits outlined in my Keystone video, and more! Our Shredder Grenades put bleed stacks on everyone who survives the explosion, so when we're clearing out the mobs to safely target down armored enemies, we'll get that massive bonus weak spot damage from our combat blade's mercy killing blessing.
It was a mercy killing.
An incredibly effective build where grenades can supplement your blade's horde clear, prime big target targets to take maximum damage and do what they always do. Slay, stagger, and clear the way for a timely revive that you can speed to using your dagger's incredible charging heavy attack. Now, there is an issue with this build, a fairly substantial issue, but before we get into that, it's time for everyone's favorite part of my videos. That's right, it's comment exhibition time! Oh, big shoutouts to all my patrons. Without you, I'd be working a 9 to 5 and only have time to make these curse-laden unmonetized shitposts in my free time when desperately avoiding my wife, or, as she's better known around my house, the Beast of Nurgle. Here's our first commenter, 3000 Silence, who writes, "This video is a distillation of all the knee-jerk reactions and blatant misrepresentations of Keystones on Reddit the first couple of weeks after patch 15, capped it off by classlessly fat-shaming Lizzo. Get good and leave people be." Now, obviously, the main body of this comment I can't counter. Not only do his unsubstantiated claims invoke Reddit, already making his argument above reproach, but then he puts the nail in the coffin by saying get good, the win button to any sort of gaming discussion. But I do have to give a big Canadian sorry to everyone for my unwarranted fat shaming of lovely lumpy Lizzo. I was in a dark place at the time of recording because I'd only run a 1:44 for my yearly half marathon as I struggled against the inexorable progress of time and took it out on an easy target. Easy in particular because she's more wide than tall and can be seen approaching along the horizon for countless miles away. I wholly regret these actions. I can guarantee all of you that I will never make the horrible mistake of fat shaming the known fat shamer Lizzo ever again. I regret ever stooping so low, which I realize now is especially offensive since Lizzo herself cannot physically stoop due to her massive unbalanced gelatinous weight, as she would helplessly tumble to the ground and require professional assistance to once again have the stability to defy gravity and reinstate her own. I will never speak ill of Lizzo or her luscious 1.5 yao mings of putrid circumference ever again. And that's a Nasty Nurgle Nick big gay guarantee! To show my dedication, I won't even Photoshop her in when I make the beach whale reference at the beginning of this video. Our next comment comes from Commissar Antilus 3742, who had the absolute gall to try and correct me on my video when he wrote, "Ahem, iron will is not the thing that's making your take the overhead, your yellow toughness is. Any amount of yellow toughness, if it's at max, will give you an ablative free hit against everything. Poxburster, sniper shots, mauler slash crusher overheads, but also one random Drake Stalker bullet can waste its effectiveness, so be careful about that. Of course, it's not written anywhere in the game, probably bugs and Zealot course is the only other ability that gives yellow toughness that's meant to make you invulnerable, so..." And this stupid, brain-dead moron is absolutely correct. Big thanks to him for pointing this out. Like most people, when I had a bunch of toughness and mitigation, I incorrectly assumed that when I was able to eat an overhead that would normally have annihilated my bunghole, it was all my talents and curios coming together to protect me. Turns out that it's actually some sort of strange interaction where if you have completely full overshield, regardless of the qualitative or quantitative attributes of your toughness or your overshield, you can take any single hit no matter how deadly without it overflowing to your health pool. And if you take even a single point toughness damage before getting hit by that overhead, you'll instantly fucking die. Who knew? I don't even think Fat Shark knows. Coming in next is Storm Shadow 281, who tells me how it is. I won't lie, the first minute or two of the video was starting to put me off because of the annoying YouTuber voice, but good lord, the satire clips that real quick. Honestly, that was one of the funniest videos I've watched this month and provides some amazingly useful information to boot. Good shit, my friend. Now, as flattering as this comment is, it really struck a nerve with me. Back when I made the best Psyker build video, I was under the impression that no one would ever see it. It was made clear when I created an Invincible video to roast my most hated character of the only season I watched as a funny way to explain to my friends why I wasn't interested in season 2, and only a handful of strangers stumbled onto it at the most recent peak of Invincible popularity. So I was sure that when my Psyker friend Gum Gum made a joke about me creating a build video explaining why my dueling sword build was so much better than his fire staff build, that its viewership would mostly be limited to me and my circle of friends. And I was wrong. The whole reason I hate the annoying YouTuber voice is because I was intentionally roasting all the awful YouTubers I'd seen with their forced enthusiasm that made me click off their videos within seconds of having opened them from the overwhelming secondhand embarrassment. What I'm really trying to say is, the only reason I use that god-awful voice is because, like every other YouTuber, I want to lure in children, and that's why I'm no longer allowed within 500 feet of public schools. And finally, Cascade3861, who wrote, "Interesting meme build that is nowhere near optimal, but honestly probably better than the random trash the average player runs, so a decent 6 out of 10, 8 out of 10 if we curving of the state of YouTuber and gameplay builds." And I'm only highlighting this because, if you're gonna come down to the circus that is the YouTube comment section, you might as well see the clown. Now the big problem with our combat blade is that it's just strictly worse than a shrapnel Hiroshima Batman who can use a fucking gun and has the combat blade simply for mobility and chunking through crushers and for when you're allied with a piece of shit who monopolizes all the ammo.
Oh, nice. Really, you're just gonna pick up that full ammo bag right in front of me. Yeah, you clearly need it with your white ammo. You're definitely not a piece of shit. Oh, good, and then you died. Glad you caught that ammo, bud.
You're gonna make him leave.
Good, because you're a veteran. Holding down the trigger on a fully auto is going to trump racing around with a knife every time. Not to mention that, if you're gonna make a melee build, veterans are the only class in the game who can use power swords. And you're gonna run around with a knife? What are you, high? Use the power sword. Of course, if you just want to have fun, it's certainly an effective build. Lots of damage and versatility with an effective answer for every encounter. It pumps over shields onto your allies, dumps stagers onto your enemies, and gives you multiple tools to save downed allies from just about any situation. A fine build that capitalizes on orc difficulties. But this isn't about finding a fun build for the combat blade, this is about crowning the one who uses it the best, so the veteran could fuck right off. Now, one aspect of the combat blade that we haven't fully discussed yet is Assassin. You might think that the tags at the top of each weapon are just there to give a vague idea of what the weapon is built to achieve and ultimately mislead you, and you'd be right, almost always. Except for Assassin, which is telling you that the base crit chance is actually doubled compared to every other weapon. Just one of those classic instances of indecipherable Fat Shark stat sheets. Thanks, Fat Shark! What it means for us is not only does the combat blade thrive off of increased finesse damage, but it is innately more likely to crit with every attack. And you know who likes to crit? That's right, I'm talking about Invocation of Death. This one talent means that the Zealot can absolutely decimate with the combat blade. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the bread and butter crit build for the Zealot. We take a quick jaunt down the right side to get Scourge, a way for us to build up an insane 30% increased critical chance our combat blade can make extra use of as it bleeds enemies for our blessing to exploit.
It was a mercy killing.
And grab toughness, toughness, and toughness. Then we're free to go down the left, through the stun storm, grab that amazing duelist talent for finesse damage on dodge, then down those insanely useful invincibility nodes into our toughness aura. Then we grab Fury of the Faithful, both charges, and we go straight down into the big crit daddy tree. Punishment is pretty much useless for us, but Invocation of Death and Blazing Piety with its modifiers give us a plus 25% chance to crit with essentially a 100% uptime in every fight as it refreshes with each crit. Then there's some freedom with where you might want to head to next, but for me, I always want that 10% attack speed from Faithful Frenzy, and then it's only 2 points to get Face Fortitude, maybe the best talent in the tree. It gives us double the wounds that a Curio would, which puts us at an optimal amount for Bleed for the Emperor and frees up our Curio slots for pure toughness. Pure toughness because, of course, we're going to use Fury of the Faithful. Half our toughness instantly replenished with every dash. The bigger our toughness pool, the more significant the benefits. And when we put all of that into action with the combat blade's attack speed and crit chance, we can be an absolute train of staggering carnage. Throwing ourselves into hordes, slicing and dicing like a maniac, and refreshing our Fury of the Faithful at a manic pace. Just keep spamming and jerking and ramming until you have a clear shot to peg those armored enemies with a well-timed thrust. Your protection constantly being replenished by your frenzied pounding, maintaining the thin barrier keeping you from thrusting into the wrong hole and contracting Nasty Nurgle's blessing, all the while being ready to flash everyone, leaving them stunned and dazed and reeling and begging to be plowed. And you haven't even pulled out your cannon yet, for when you absolutely can't take no for an answer, when you need to penetrate as many bodies as possible to get that one special ass. That's to say, it's a pretty good build. Lots of damage output, tons of mobility from both the heavy attack of our blade and the dash of our ability, paired with its toughness replenishment to keep our defenses up and massive dodges to keep us safe from specials. But it does feel like a bit of a waste. If we look at the description of our Fury of the Faithful, it reads, your next melee hit grants plus 25%, nice quality control, Fat Shark. And is guaranteed a critical hit. With our combat knife, a guaranteed critical hit is worth very little. We're already critting well over half the time. But you know what can make use of that? Charge into a crusher and chainsaw his fucking head off with a guaranteed critical. The extra attack speed that we can barely feel on the combat blade instead gives us a massive boost with slower weapons, letting us mow through hordes and proc more criticals to chain together another Fury of the Faithful and keep up our onslaught. Far superior to the the combat blade at the menial expense of not being able to spam the ability quite so often. Which means, while it's, of course, an effective, fun build with plenty of damage where you can rely on the endless survivability of your ability as long as you're fleet-footed enough to dodge specials, it's not the best. And we're here to find the best. But you'll need to wait for that because right now we need to insert a clunky message from today's sponsor. Over here in the Darktider Dungeons, we have teamed up with Zack Snyder's Schneider Cut to release possibly the most ambitious tie-in food to date. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you for the very first time the Nurgle Burgle. The Nurgle Burglar. The Nurgle Burglar. Fuck it.
Fucking thing sucks!
Who named this piece of shit? Now, you might have noticed, there's one class that can use the combat blade that we haven't mentioned yet. Nah, I'm just kidding. If you're gonna make a melee build, Psychers are the only class in the game who can use dueling swords. And you're gonna run around with a knife? What are you, high? Use the dueling sword! But our only issue with the Zealot build was not exploiting Fury of the Faithful as much as we could be. So what if we went down a different path? Our goal here is a race to the bottom. We go down the right side like before since we really want those backstab and critical talents, but this time we just keep going. Knives? Why not? Dance to death? Could be useful when swapping to a revolver to nail a specialist. Can't be stunned? Great! Stagger on weak spot hits? Our combat blade does a surprising amount of stagger on weak spot criticals, comparable to hitting someone with a thunder hammer, so that's pretty good. Then we get Loner, which will very much come in handy in this stupid ass build, believe me, so that's a winner. Then we hop down and grab Shroud Field. That's right, it's invis time! Absolutely do not go down the extra damage route for our invis. We're not max heavy attacking with a two-hander here, we're wailing away with a dinky little combat blade. The extra boosted damage isn't worth the hit to our cooldown. On top of that, doubling the length of our invisibility gives us the time to blow through objectives and save allies. Then we jump down, collect a nice stacking melee damage buff, and grab an amazing 20% cooldown restoration on backstab kill. Sounds pretty neat, right? Pretty much a guaranteed 20% off when we use our invisibility to get a free backstab kill, and dodging around with our dagger's massive dodge distance lets us slip around enemies just enough for our flailing to count as backstabs half the time. We'll get our invis off cooldown at a rapid pace, but not fast enough for this build. That's right, we're jumping all the way over to the other side because not only do we want that Invocation of Death ability cooldown on crit, but we also want to keep our crit chance maxed with Blazing Piety. We will take massive chunks out of our cooldown with every backstab kill, and we'll be chopping through it with every slash and crit that we spam out, just about guaranteeing that no matter what awful situation we just hurled ourselves into, we can get our invis back off cooldown in seconds. Then we'll get the attack speed as always, and then it's up to you. 2 extra wounds right there, though you don't have Blade the Emperor anymore to truly capitalize off it, so you might prefer something else. Maybe Purge the Unclean to help mow down trash and take out big enemies. Maybe Swift Certainty for that extra movement speed and dodging while sprinting, paired with good balance to give you plus 25% damage reduction after every dodge. Now I know what you're thinking, this might be the dumbest build you've ever seen. You're goddamn right it is. This is truly one of the most useless builds when paired with a solid, competent team. Your damage output will be eclipsed by more specialized zealots and veterans, your horde clear will pale in comparison to any psyker, and your only real use will be an easy way to blow through most objectives. But you know when you'll really shine? When shit hits the goddamn fan. When your allies are dying left and right, when everyone is surrounded and the game is lost. You know what you can do? Just go invisible and fuck off. You literally cannot die. Now, upon saying this, I'm sure plenty of people are thinking the same thing. Sure, with theoretical perfect play, you can stay alive with pretty much any build. But that's the thing. You don't need perfect play with this build. Hell, you don't even have to be particularly good. You just need to make a few smart key decisions along the way and be insanely anally conscious of any specialists around you who can instantly disable you when you peek out your 6-second invisibility to recharge another. Not to mention that this build is fun. Very fun. You know when everyone's fighting a big horde and you start seeing annoying laser sights from snipers threatening to get an angle on you as you're dodging and weaving? A sniper perched a football field away in some obnoxious position? Well, you know what you can do. You can go invisible, take out your revolver, and peg them. Easy as that. But you know what you can also do? You can go invisible and charge across the entire field, separating you like a madman and stab that motherfucker right in his back! Every time there's a range line, you don't have to worry about using a psych or shield or taking cover or suppressing them with range fire, and neither does your team because you can just zip right over there and start hacking into them like a crazed hobo and force them to take their dinky melee weapons out. Even when there's no big targets to dash over to or range lines to decimate, you can simply start smacking into the horde from behind, staggering their advance on your allies as the closest enemies stop to engage you in the few seconds you spend maniacally stabbing through half a dozen of them before flitting back out of existence. You are a solo machine. There is literally no place on the map too far away for you to engage with your filthy little dagger. Your boots were made for flying across the map and purging the unclean, and that's just what they'll do. You will look, sound, and act like an absolute imbecile to the rest of your team until they need you to clutch it out, and suddenly you're the best player on the team. The best player in the world! Unless you're not on the ball and get nabbed by a net half the world away from the rest of your team and die hours before anyone can even think to help you, but that's not gonna happen, right? You're gonna pay attention and you're gonna be awesome. You're not gonna let the insane pace of this Neanderthal build make you rash and stupid. You're gonna be smart and cool and collected behind that blaze of panic stabbing. You can even do respectable damage to monstrosities. Just because you're not using a hammer to one-shot with doesn't mean your combat blade can't do considerable damage with each backstab or headshot. About the only enemy in the game that can even give you any problems is a horde of ragers, forcing you to dodge back and disengage rather than manically replenishing another invisibility. And that's what your throwing knives are there for. Spam them out to put those ragers down so they can't slow you down. Hell, if you're good enough with them, you don't even need a revolver. Throw on whatever your favorite range weapon is. A bolter? Sure. A shotgun? Why not? A flamer? The biggest decision you'll ever have to make on this Zealot is when to hold them and when to fold them. And by hold them, I mean holding the line with your teammates to help them through a tough fight. And by fold them, I mean when to drop them like dead weight and fuck right off. Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave your one helpless remaining teammate to die a horrible death alone so you can zoom forward and save a brand new plucky team ready to take on what's next. A friendly reset button at your team's disposal. A helpful ghost who's there to thin hordes, backstab big threats, nail out objectives, pick up allies, save runs, and sometimes to get caught in a net and instantly die like a fucking clown. Now, I can hear some of you complaining, I need more speed. I need more speed! Alright, you asked for it. Unlike the veteran, the Zealot's keystones are fun and useful, and you know what's almost as good as jacking up your crit rate? Ramping up your attack speed to ungodly levels. The more stabs, the more potential crits, right? All that's required of you is to keep your clicking finger moving as fast as your blade can. At the absolute sonic speeds you will be hitting while running this build, it will be even more difficult to keep your cool and keep your eye out for specials. You'll be jumping from one threat to the next at such a breakneck pace that I can guarantee you that you will forget that you even have a team somewhere behind you. You'll be so caught up in your own little world of going invis, stabbing the biggest threat in the back, manically recharging your invis and rinsing and repeating that you might as well not even be playing the same game as your more mentally stable teammates. But where momentum has your back is in the huge bonus it gives to your dodge distance. With the combat blade, it's already a gargantuan distance by default, but with momentum it becomes almost comical. Leaping side to side with so much enthusiasm that it's nearly impossible to get trapped while simultaneously all but guaranteeing that you will unwittingly hurl yourself off the map at least once per mission. I honestly don't know which one I prefer. You don't get invis as easily with momentum, meaning you're probably even less useful than before, but goddamn if you can't swing that knife like an absolute lunatic. Slicing enemies to ribbons is incredibly satisfying, and dodging half a mile is both effective and exhilarating. Either way, both ways offer a fun and sometimes effective way to play. Worst case scenario, your allies are too competent so you never get your chance to shine. Best case scenario, you're the last one left alive, chaining invisibilities together like a meth addict mugging infected for their sweet ability regen and hauling the final objective to the end to save the game for everyone. It offers the freedom to leap into the most dangerous of situations with the safety of instantly escaping them. Sort of like playing Tracer in Overwatch until a godly McCree absolutely ends your whole career with one of the greatest 1-2 headshot roll cancel headshot combos ever put into action. Let's see that one again, Dave. What an immaculate play from an incredible player. It's an exhilarating thrill ride to play from start to finish. It defies Darktider convention by letting you throw yourself into levels of danger that you have the common sense to not even attempt with any other build, to make rash, inadvisable decisions that give massive rewards if you succeed while leaving you an easy escape route if you don't. And the best part part is, everyone loves playing with people who run invisibility. They definitely won't announce their distaste and abandon a game that goes on to be an easy win for everyone involved. Now, a nearly permanently invisible Zealot who can clutch out every game they're in with even mediocre play sounds pretty incredible, giving infinite lives to your allies while they rarely even have to worry about even helping you with objectives. But the question still remains, who is the king of the combat blade? Is it the veteran with their strong base talents that turn the effective blade into a true instrument of death? Or is it the Zealot that can use the insane crit chance and attack speed to reset the cooldown on their chosen ability at a manic pace? Or, in a dramatic twist, is it actually some insane yet unseen Psyker build? The answer? It's me. It's Nasty Nurgle Nick. I'm the best. I'm the king of the combat blade. Fuck you, I'm putting on the crown and there's nothing you can do about it. Oh my god, I look amazing in this. Happy New Year, everyone. Big thanks to everyone for this award. I know that I've more than earned it, but it's nice to get some recognition that I'm entitled to. Another big shout out to my patrons. Oh no, my mom must have found the charge on her credit card. I just spent all my waste money on this crown.